Hey everybody, it's Dan Mori with Staffing Mastery, and I just wanted to walk you through one of my favorite exercises that I go through and I take, staffing leaders and owners through at this time of the year when you are really wrapping up your year-end process in support of setting a strategic plan for next year. And if you actually watched my training video a couple months ago on how to set a strategic plan that really talked about how to lay that framework out, you'll know where this process that I'm going to walk you through today fits in. And while I'm doing this, I'm going to talk you through the training document that we follow. It's sort of a checklist as far as the year-end planning process goes. And then I'm going to demonstrate it for you on, a tool that I like to use and a tool that I coach my, my clients to use called the Tracker, and how this works with a kind of just a demonstration type company. So with it, I just want to welcome you to the year-end planning process, and hopefully this helps you make sense of your data, helps you set a forecast for next year that you can align a budget to, so you can actually have a successful growth year as well as a highly profitable year. So check this out here. So what you're looking at here is your year-end planning checklist. This is kind of your year-end planning document that you can follow. There's a number of steps. There's a couple other steps in here than the actual setting a strategic plan. There is overlap between this process and the setting a strategic plan process that I covered a couple months ago, because the calendar it bumps up. 12/31 rolls right into 1/1. And when you're looking at this data, your business has continuity that just flows into the next year. So there is overlap in this process. I am going to point it out to you. But really, one of the first things that you want to do is the two steps are you want to determine your anticipated year-end revenue and gross margin, where you're going to end up. And I say determine that. If you're doing this at the last week of the year, then you know where you're going to end up. But if you're looking at this ahead of time and you're getting into this planning in, October, November, December, early December, and you're really trying to figure out where you're going to be, in 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever that might be at the end of the year, like you have to estimate a little bit, right? And I actually use, you can see on here, triangulate the 3 forecast categories from the tracker. I'm going to explain what that means in a second. Step 2 would be to determine your current annual run rate. Okay. And all this is taking the average weekly revenue in GM, for the past 8 or 13 weeks, depending on what your preference is, multiplying it by 52 just to create an annualized run rate. And the reason this is important is this is going to be an indicator as if your business is accelerating, it's kind of growing, your trend is up, or if it's decelerating, it's slowing down, right? And if you want to forecast growth, it's a lot easier to do that if you're already accelerating into next year, right? But if you're decelerating, then there's some different business decisions you might have to look at, and your strategic plan might be a little bit different. So those are really the first couple of steps that I do to get an idea of where I'm at in kind of closing out the year and setting my goal for next year. Okay, so just to show this to you in tracker format, this is our workshop company called Vital Recruiting, and this is what we do. This is basically weekly tracking data, for the 52 weeks of the year. I do have this completed, but I just want to show this to you if you've not seen this type of tool before. This is the main tracker that we use, and it has all of your information in here, and it starts with what your yearly revenue goal was, your yearly payroll goal, yearly gross margin targets, and it will break it down by where your weekly revenue needs to be, your weekly payroll, your weekly GM, what your head count needs to be based on, what your payroll looks like and the average number of clients that you need to be billing on a weekly basis in order to hit these targets, right? So these are your goals. These are the targets that you're going for. This box here, this is actually showing you, it's airing out right now because it's in the last week of the year and there's nothing that needs to be adjusted because there's no time left to adjust it in this example. But if we were to change this back to one of these other weeks, you would see that this actually changed. It actually tells you what you would need to do in order to hit the targets. But at the last week of the year, it just airs out. All this box does is at any time throughout the year, you're just going to be updating this weekly based on the number of weeks that you have data logged for. right? I'm going to talk about this section in a second. But as you do that, it's going to tell you if you're off track or not and what you would need to adjust your revenue, headcount, all of that stuff to in order to hit your targets, right? So as much as we love to, plot linear growth, we know that staffing continuously goes up and down and it's very volatile, and we have to, make adjustments based on what's actually happening in the year. So these ones here, these next three boxes, these are my 3 forecast simulators. So it's sort of, it uses 3 different data sets, 3 different forecasting models to show where you're going to end up the year. Okay. First one is run rate of current performance. All this is doing is it's just taking what you've already generated for the year and then just assuming that your average week year to date is going to be the same as all of the remaining weeks, right? And it creates that. Then we have, and if every week we're like last week, this is a little bit of a dream one if you had a really crazy week and it was super high, but it's going to basically say, hey, if all the remainder weeks of the year were just like your most recent week, this is where you might come in, right? And then there's the trailing 8-week average. Some people like 8 weeks because it's a little bit more of a condensed period. Some people like 13 weeks because it's more indicative of a quarter, right? It's a business decision. We work with both. This example is 8 weeks. This is just going to say, hey, if all of the remaining weeks of the year were the equivalent of the average of the last 8 or the trailing 8, this is where you would end up. Now, you're going to notice that all of these examples are the same because the year is complete. But again, if we didn't have all of the data set in there and you picked a different week to, have data up to, you would see these would be slightly different, right? So that's the first, thing to be familiar with. All we're doing to get this data in this tracker is we just collect 6 data points. We put in billing, gross margin, payroll, hours, number of temps or contractors or field associates, number of clients, right? And then it will start to calculate the rest. It's going to tell you the hours per temporary employee, the average pay per hour, the average GM per hour. And then over here, it's going to give you kind of your roll up data. What is your average revenue per week year to date, the average payroll per week year to date, GM per week year to date, average temps per week, average hours per temp, average pay per hour, average clients per week, average temporaries per client, average GM per hour, and the average weekly value in gross margin dollars of one of your temporary employees or contractors. And this is all really important data when it comes to creating your plans and knowing how much work is going to go into hitting next year's target. So as you're going through your year and you're tracking out all of this information, right, it's going to be building a profile for your business and what's going on. It's going to be kind of giving you a bit of a roadmap that tells you, what, are you on track with hitting your goals? Or are you not? And as we get to this part of the year where we're doing our year-end planning and we're trying to wrap things up and get into a position of clarity so we can set that strategic plan for next year, this is the document that is going to be really critical to that, okay? So now that you're familiar with this sheet here and this tab that we're working on, I'm going to show you a couple others in just a few minutes. I want to remind you of those first 2 steps of the year-end planning process. First one is determine your anticipated year-end revenue and gross margin. If you don't have a completed year, right, if you're not in the last week of the year, you would actually just use these 2 boxes right here. First one is estimated year-end. It's just triangulating. It's just averaging. It's taking these 3 forecast scenarios and averaging it out. Because we have a complete data set for the year in this example, they're exactly the same. There is no estimate. This is where Vital Recruiting is going to finish their year. They're going to finish at $24,023,813 of revenue, $4,924,882 of gross margin. And you can see it's red because it's less than the original target. Okay, they had a down year. And in some other training videos, we're going to get into why and what you would do about it. But our friends at Vital, the main drivers of it is their fill percentage was historically lower than it had been in years past. And their employee attrition was historically higher than it had been in years past. So it caused them to miss their target, and they're going to be working on improving those things as part of their strategic plan in 2023. But for now, you can see that they missed their revenue target by 2.3 million and their gross margin target by $380,000. So not the best year, right? That was step 1. Where are you going to be? This is where they're at. Step 2 is determine your current annual run rate. And again, what I do is I just take the average of the last 8 weeks because we work on an 8-week trailing review here. Now, the good news is these are green. And the reason they're green is because they are higher than where we're going to end up, meaning we've got some momentum. We're accelerating into the next year. Okay, based on what's going on in the business right now, we're actually annualizing out at a level that's higher than where we're anticipated ending up on a year. And that's a great thing, right? Because that indicates growth, right? That indicates that we are going to have a more positive year next year than where we're ending up this year. And that's always a good thing, right? So that's steps 1 and 2, to actually look at those things and say, hey, this is where we're at. This is where it looks like we're going. And now step 3 is going to be determining next year's goal. Okay. Now, a couple different ways to do this. If you're just setting up for goals, you might just say, hey, I want to grow by 10% or 20%, or you might have a dollar amount in mind that's a goal. This is really the first stab at it. It's just saying, hey, this is what we think the goal is going to be. And if you remember from setting a strategic plan process, step 1 is just setting a goal. It's like just putting a number out there before you validate it, right? And this is where that overlap happens. You know, if you've been doing this process and you already have your goals outlined like Vital does, you would see that their goal for next year is already set. They already had it in place at $27,712,867 of revenue. They want to add an extra $132,000 in perm, you know, for a total revenue of 27.8 and total gross margin of 5.7 million. That's what they're looking at. So we would look at that. We would say, hey, that's our goal. That's step 3 and 4, setting a staffing or contingent workforce goal and setting a perm goal. Okay. So just to show you where we're at in this process of year-end planning, what I've just walked you through, it's these first 4 steps right here. It's just determining your anticipated year-end, determine your current annual run rate, determine next year's staffing goal and next year's perm goal. Okay. So now we get a sense of where we're at and where we think we would like to be. Okay. So now we start to get into the validation phase of this. Before we set a goal, we want to see if it's actually reasonable, right? Is it realistic? Can we do this? And how much work would it take to accomplish this goal? So step 5 and 6 are something that I call the GM retention rate. Okay. This is step 5 is we're going to determine this. I'm going to show you how to do this. And then we're going to apply it to our current annual run rate and show you what is a reasonable expectation of retaining gross margin as we go into next year. So let's bounce back over to the tracker. And we're going to go over to a tab called client retention. All of this is just a worksheet. You could probably pull these out of your, your software, an Aviante report, something like that, that's going to pull all this, historic data. But just to talk you through it really quickly, you're looking at really the last 4 years, all right, and how much gross margin your clients have generated year over year. So just as in like client ID 1, and this might be a client name for you, but for this, it's just client ID number 1. In 2019, they generated 100,000 of gross margin. 2020, 115,000. 2021, they came down a little bit. 2022 is the strongest year yet. Some clients will be like that. They'll just kind of fluctuate up and down year in and year out. Client 2, they were 85,000. They fell off a little bit in 2020, and then they never came back. The pandemic put them out of business, and they didn't bill with us in 21 or 22, right? Some clients do that. And you can see clients 3 and 4, they ebb and flow like the first one. And then you get clients 5, 6, and 7 that only billed with us in 2019 and haven't been back since, right? So all you're going to do is you're going to start with your oldest year and work your way forward based on all these clients, right? So in this year here, you're going to have, no gaps. Everything is going to be, all next to each other. And then this year, you're going to have some clients that don't bill, which is why you see gaps in there, right? But then once you get to the, down here to client 47, these are your existing clients. Anything after this is going to be new business that you actually picked up, right? And then you just follow this process over. You do the same thing for, 2021, 2022, and you can see that you're stacking these clients, and not all clients are being, retained forward and whatnot. But by doing this, you're actually going to be able to get some important data, and you're going to be able to drive to the GM retention rate that I was just mentioning. That's a key part of year-end planning, right? So the first thing, you're going to basically see your gross margin. It's going to tell you what your GM gross or growth percentages year over year, right? Had a good bounce back year in 21, which I think a lot of us in the industry did. It's going to tell you how many clients build. It's going to say how many old clients build, so you can see how many clients you're retaining, how many new clients you're actually acquiring each year, which is a good indication of your sales efforts. Your client retention percentage. I like to see this. I don't use it in a lot of my weighted metrics just because every client is different. One client you could retain might only do $10,000 a year of gross margin. Another one could do $1 million, right? So I don't put a lot of stock in this, but GM retention I do, because that really is the economic value that we capture from providing a service to our clients that we use to run the company. So this one is a pretty good indicator, and it's good to use in a weighted model like this. So what I do is I just say how much of my old client gross margin carried forward, right? So all I'm doing is I'm just taking this amount of gross margin from the clients that billed in 2019, which this totals 2,870,000, and I'm dividing it into the 3,365,000 that those clients generated the year before to see how much I retained. Now, some clients went away, some clients generated less margin, some generated more. But that's based on your ability to retain your clients and service them and grow them and all that. And if you follow this trend year over year, you're going to start to see patterns emerge. And if you just take that last 3-year average, it will give you an idea. And in this case, Vital Recruiting, they do a really nice job of retaining margin. They retain their clients, they grow their clients, they do a nice job. And you get to this 91% GM retention rate. And this is where we would move into step 6 of the year-end planning process. And this is where you actually apply it to that annualized year-end run rate that we learned over here on the tracker. So this number right here, we can estimate that we're going to retain about 91% of it, based on our historic trends. Again, there's going to be outliers. You might have just picked up a big account, or you might have picked up a big piece of one of your clients that's going to grow, or you might actually know a client's going away, right? You will have to adjust for that kind of instinctive, outlier business. But overall, it's going to give you the roughly right guiding principle that you need to forecast. So that's where I like to do it. There's a sheet in this tracker. I try to keep it all separate, but there's a goal tab. This is going to take the stuff that we found out, right? This is our goal sheet. Where you're at, this 24,023, it aligns with this number right here. That's where we ended up. That's our total, right? We missed the mark, but that's where we're at. Annual run rate is that 27 million. That's just this number right here. Based on our current performance over the last 8 weeks, if next year looked like that, that's where we would be, right? So those two numbers are there. Goal for 2023, right? It's a little bit more than the 27 million, and that's based on goals that we had already set. Prior to 2021, we had this growth plan in place that aligned with some long-term strategic plan or initiative or targets, that came into play right here, right? So we know this. We have this perm goal, that we're trying to achieve, which I'm just going to update that. We want to do $132,000 of perm. And that comes from right here. Okay. So now it's like, we know where we're at. We know our annual run rate is. We've got a goal that we've set. We're testing out if it's, valid, which is part of that strategic planning process that I walked you through a couple months ago, right? This is the first time you use that GM retention data. We take that 91% and we apply it to this annual run rate, and there's nothing truly scientific about it. It just for some reason seems to be a roughly right guiding principle as to what you might expect to carry into the next year. And then there's another exercise that I teach. I'm not going to dig too deep into it right now. But if you're a prudent business focused on growth, at the end of the year, you really should be performing a 4-square exercise to look at which clients of yours are maybe consuming more resources than the value that you get from the clients, and maybe you should be raising their rates. It's just a 4-square exercise that I walk through to determine which clients, should get rate increases. So I focus on, raising those rates. If you do that exercise, you might learn that you can generate an extra $500,000 in revenue from doing those rate increases, which is great. So what this is going to tell you is if your goal is 27,712,000 and you have a perm goal of 132, if your existing clients are expected to retain or reasonably expected to retain 24.5 million of it, and you believe that you can get another 500,000 in rate increases, it tells you that your new sales have to generate $2.5 million in order for you to hit this goal. Okay. So that is a solid target to say, now we know exactly what our sales team needs to do. Okay. Now, the next phase of this that I want to talk you through as I flip back over to the actual checklist here is all we did is we just completed step 6. We applied the GM retention rate to your current. We get an idea of how much needs to come from sales. I talked about the 4-square exercise in step 7 to see what your rate increases would be. Now, the next step in step 8 is to determine your yield through to new billing clients. Okay. This is going to be on the sales activity tracker. Ideally, if you are a tracking centric or data centric organization, you track all of your connects or contacts or prospecting behaviors and your sales process to see your yield from your meetings to proposals to contracts signed to billing clients and all of that stuff. Just to give you an example of what that might look like, I'll show you on the tracker in a second. But then once you do that, that's going to tell you how much sales activity is going to need to happen. And then it should also indicate what your headcounts need to be in order to get to, where you're at on your goal. And you can see this in this sheet, going back to the tracker here. Based on this, your target employees per week in order to hit this goal is going to be 509, right? Like every single week of the year, you need to average 509, and you need to actually get to a total of 568 billing headcount by the end of the year, right? So these are the numbers that you have to first decide, are these reasonable? Does it make sense that we could do this? And your first indicator is just going back to your tracker and seeing, have we even done it? And you look early in the year, there's a couple weeks, we had some weeks in there where things were good, fell off, but we got some momentum. I think it's reasonable to think that we can grow to that number, 568. And if we get to that point, again, that's a linear plotted forecast. But if you teach your team, hey, we need to be averaging, 509 headcount every single week in order to hit our staffing goal, right? They know that number. They're going to know if they're below it, they're moving away from their goal. If they're above it, they're moving towards their goal. And they know that they need to get to that 568, right? And then this is going to tell you how many do you need to add per week. In this case, it's a little over 2. That's your net new. So once you figure out all the orders you need and how to fill those, and you backfill attrition and all of that stuff, at the end of the day, you need to be a little more than 2 higher next week than you were this week in order to stay on track with getting to your goal. And then based on the average temps billing per client, you would need 13 new billing clients in order to pull this off, right? And you can see in here, this is a recruiter KPI because it's on the headcount side. New billing clients would be on the salesperson side. And you can start to see this data over here. I'm going to show you the sales activity tracker and show you where this comes from, okay? So again, if you have salespeople and they're tracking their behaviors, it might look something like this. And you might have different behaviors, or you might have different plans that you do. So just know this is a fairly generic example, but it might look like, hey, calls and emails and walk-ins. And these are your connects. These are the things that you might be doing to try to get a meeting, right? You might have a LinkedIn game plan in there that might be in there. You might have direct mailers, whatever it might be. You can build all your activities out in here. But ideally, all of those activities are designed to do one thing: get a meeting, right? And then when we have those meetings are designed to do one thing: submit proposals. And those proposals are designed to do one thing, and that's get a client. And ideally, that client gives us an order that we can fill and then bill, right? So this is a sales activity tracker. It just tracks the activities and it shows what the yields are, the results of meetings and proposals and clients and all of this stuff. And then it's just going to track it on the quarterly. It's going to say, hey, how many inputs, how many behaviors were done in the quarter? Okay, 831 calls and emails and walk-ins were completed, and we got 9 meetings, right? So we got a little over 1% conversion rate, okay? Based on those meetings, we had 9 meetings, we submitted 7 proposals, which means 78% of the time that we meet, we're getting a proposal out, okay? And out of those 7 proposals, 4 of them signed, which means that, we're closing 57% of our proposed business. Gives you an idea. And then you can see what the performance looks like on Q2 and Q3. And what's really cool that I love about this is you can start to see trends. If you start to see, input rates drop or, increase or things like that, you might start to see capacity issues or, maybe even just consistency or commitment issues with your the work. If you start to see conversion percentages change, like here in Q4, like their conversion rate for the number of meetings they're getting based on their output is fantastic. It's nearly double the highest that was in Q1, right? It's great. But then you start looking at like, where's your close rates? Hey, you know what? In Q3, we had a strong close rate. What's really neat about this is if you see something drop off, if you see the conversion rate from meetings to proposals or proposals to clients drop off, there's a coaching opportunity. You can say, hey, I feel like maybe there's something going on in the meeting that maybe needs some sales coaching, learning how to navigate that meeting to get to a proposal a little bit better. Or, hey, we're not winning as much business. Is there a market constraint going on that we need to adjust to? Or is our salesperson not following up properly or not really selling to the value properly? It gives you some indicators of where you can coach and better manage your team to improve performance, right? So I love this. Scrolling over here a little bit further, it's just going to total this stuff. It's going to say, hey, this is how much has happened on the year. We got 37 meetings, which is consistent with that 1%. Out of 37 meetings, we submitted 26 proposals. So we're getting 70%, conversion there. And then out of the 26 proposals, we're getting 18 signed, right? Got 69%, client acquisition conversion, which is pretty cool. And then it's going to tell you total new clients. Not all of them came in with a job order, right? So we only got 89% of the ones that came in actually brought an order. And only 83% of those actually turned into billing clients, right? So if you track this type of data, then it's going to tell you how many proposals do you need to get a billing client? How many meetings do you need to get a billing client? How many activities does your salesperson need to do to get a billing client? And if you think about the fact that, we need 13 new billing clients to pull off our goal, right? To hit that goal, that means we need to do, 211 activities times 13, right? That's the model. And then you would know, do I have a salesperson or a sales team that can actually do that, right? So it seems like a feasible goal. And so far, I'm going to say, I think it's a reasonable goal. I think that 27.7 million is within reason. I think the head count is doable, right? So the things I'm looking at to validate, just to show you this, coming back over to the checklist, is this, new sales goal. It's going to populate in there, confirm year-end target headcount, new clients, weekly prospecting goals, right? These are steps 2 and 3 of the strategic planning process, right? We're over here, we established a vision and then we had to validate the goal with data, validate the goal feasibility, using the payroll tracker in here. Now we want to say, hey, is this a good goal? And we want to set the goal, right? Now we're going to commit to it and we're going to, say, hey, that $27 million goal or $27.7 million goal it's a good target. Like we feel good about that goal. And that's what you announce to the organization. And you say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do 27.7 million. We're going to do this, it's going to come from this payroll and it's going to generate this much gross margin. And then ideally you are going to be looking at your budget affordability, right? Does your team that you have in place fit within the budget of this, right? And I use a financial model that's like a 50-20-30 split. 50% goes to the front of the house, your sales, marketing, and recruiting efforts. 20% is back of the house, your payroll, your corporate overhead, that kind of stuff. And then 30% drops to your bottom line. That's a model. It's not the only model out there, but it's a good starting place if you don't have financial structure in there. And if you feel like some years you're fighting for net profit and other years are not exactly sure where all the money goes, using a simple model like this is a great way to start your planning. But that's when you would look at this and say, hey, can I accomplish this within that much budget? So if my goal, just to come back over to the tracker here, and if we say my goal for this year has a GM of 5,700,000 and 50% of that is going to go to the house, which is going to be 2.8 million or somewhere in there, 2.85 million. can you run the front of your operation? Can you run your sales and your marketing and your recruiting and all of that stuff on that amount of money, right? Can you run your back office on essentially 20% of that, right? Can you do that? That way, are you protecting the profit that you need to be protecting to run the organization, right? No money, no mission, right? So that's what you want to be looking at. I'm going to show you the checklist one last time just to show you how it overlaps with setting a strategic plan so you can see that from, a couple months ago. As we were here, we went through this entire process. I know I went through it super quick, but I wanted to give you a heads up on how you should be doing this at this time of the year. It overlaps because here you're going to set this. And then once you actually set that goal, now you plan the work. This is where you actually coordinate the resources. You plan the prospecting, marketing based on the number of clients that you need to get. You can use a 30-day prospecting plan. You can use the cookbooking methodologies, the sales manager tool if you're hiring and setting goals and things like that. Then you got to understand like what time is going to be allotted for executing the plan, like how much sales goes into it, how much of your recruiting operation. I like to plan things in 13-week sprints, kind of hit a quarter, measure it, see what we need to do, make any changes, and then plan out another quarter and get running again, right? Like that's the model I like. And then it's really important that you would cast the vision to the team. Just because you have a plan doesn't mean it's going to be effective if nobody on the team knows what that plan is, or if not everybody's working from the same playbook, right? So you have to cast that vision, share the goal with the team, teach them how important they are to the process and how it aligns with them. Some people are going to need additional training. They're going to have to be skilled up. Some people are going to need to have regular accountability, and you should have a framework for collecting all of this data when you need it to make the decisions that you need to make for your business and to know if you're on track with your plan. And you should follow some level of, weekly huddle, monthly meeting, ops, maybe quarterly ops or strategic meetings to make sure that you're measuring the plan and you're moving your team through this organization. And then really the last step of this, if you remember, was aligning the vision, like connecting what you're trying to do with your organization to that of your people, right? If all of your people want to make X amount of money and you can show them how to make X amount of money within your plan and the summation of your financial goals will deliver that for all of your people, you're perfectly aligned, right? And that's the ideal goal that we strive for. It doesn't always work out that way. It's rare, but that's what you strive for. You want to create that vertical alignment for all of your people so they feel connected to it and they're personally motivated to help you achieve what you want to achieve for the organization. And then with that, it's working the plan, right? And that's what we're going to get into doing for 2023. I really hope that you found this valuable. I hope you like the concept that I demonstrated here with the tracker and showing you how to do this. And hopefully it makes your year-end processing a whole lot easier. So with that, thank you so much. If you like this kind of concept, definitely come check out Staffing Industry Analysts Executive Forum. I will be speaking on the last day there, going over these types of concepts, breaking down the tracker and showing people how to use this sort of tool to help them create better forecasts, make better business decisions with what's going on in their organization. And look forward to seeing you there.